In the height of Abbasid Caliphate around 850 AD, Baghdad is the home of innovators. Everyone's competing to invent, build and publish in Inventors of the South Tigris.
And today we'll be teaching you how to play Inventors of the South Tigris, game designed by Shem Phillips and SJ McDonald and published by Garfield Games.
And hello everyone, it's Stella
and Tarrant here from Meeple University.
Alright, let's get to the classroom.
In Inventors of the South Tigris, players are competing inventors and entrepreneurs, working collaboratively to create the best widgets and doodads for the Caliphate, while at the same time working against each other to score the most points. Players will manage dice, workers, pay to use and improve the skills of their craftspeople, strengthen their workshops, sail down the Tigris in search of opportunities and more to be the greatest inventor in the land. After 3 or 4 rounds, depending on your mode of play, whoever has amassed the most victory points will be the winner. For the main teach, I'm going to be taking you through the 4-round version of the game for 3 or 4 players. I'll explain the differences for the other modes at the end of the video. Firstly, I'll take you through the components and how they'll look at the end of setup. This is the main board and it's broken into 5 main sections. These are the guilds, where players gather influence and fight for majorities. These are the worker placement spaces. Players will be using workers from their supply to take actions in these locations. This is the tenting area, and players will be taking actions up there with their tents. This is the royalties track, where the best inventors and publishers will gain income. And this is the river. Players will sail their ships along the river for various bonuses and effects throughout the game. Below the lower left of the main board is space for the devices, and this is what you'll be inventing and promoting through the game. Ultimately, a device is going to be made up of a device board and a device card, and there's decks of each. And any devices which are in play will be placed in one of 3 columns: the left column, the middle column, or the right column. The left column always holds 4 boards, the middle column holds at most 4 boards, and the right column can hold any number. The devices will ultimately move from the left column across towards the right the more steps of inventing have occurred. But we'll see the particulars of that later on. To begin the game, you'll be seeding some but not all of these tiles with cards and with these neutral coloured tokens. You'll see throughout the game that all other versions of those tokens will be in a player colour. Each player now takes a player board and all of their coloured and player board pieces, as well as a setup card which describes their slightly unique setup. It will depict 4 guilds for which you take that much influence and add them to those guilds on the main board. It depicts the starting positions of your 11 dice. Here it would be these 4 dice in the exhausted section, these 6 dice in the ready section, and this 1 die in its matching space of your study. It depicts your starting workshop tile. Find that matching tile among the ones with the grey back and add it to the leftmost slot of one of your 3 workshop rows. Finally, it depicts your starting tower and craftspeople. Make sure you have 1 copy of each of the 5 tower tiles and flip them over so their lower numbers are showing and they're stacked in ascending order. Take a set of 6 craftspeople and place them on the level and side shown. Here you would take your yellow scribe and place it on level 4 with this green arrow indicating its face up. Here you'd take your carpenter placed on level 2 and flipped face down due to the absence of that green arrow. Repeat for all 6 craftspeople. Line up your tents in this area, being sure to use the overlay tile which matches your player count. These 2 tiles cover 2 of your 4 camel spaces, and you'll put the one with the plus on the left and the flip on the right. Then to begin the game, keep only 2 of your 3 workers, putting the other in the general supply for now. Choose a first player who takes the first player token. Then, in accordance with this card, give each player silver and device cards drawn from the deck according to their position in player order. You're now ready to play. Inventors of the South Tigris is played in 4 rounds, and each round is played in 3 phases. First is the start of round, indicated by this icon, in which players gain royalties and income. This is skipped in round 1. Second is player turns. Starting from the first player and going clockwise around the table, each player will take it in turns to take 1 main action, as well as any number of free actions. There are 4 different types of main action. Players could take 1 or 2 dice to a camel space to resolve a camel action. They may take 1 or 2 dice to a workshop to resolve that workshop. They may take a worker and place it onto either an empty single occupancy worker placement space or onto one of these larger worker placement spaces regardless of its current occupancy to resolve that space's action. Or they may take the leftmost tent from their player board and place it onto an empty bottom row tenting space to take its action. Your tenting action will be your last turn, which follows these rules for the round, even if you still have dice or workers remaining in your supply. Now, when play passes to you, instead of those options, you'll take one of the 4 mostly smaller actions listed here. At the end of the turn in which the last player has placed their tent, the player turns phase is over and you'll proceed with the end of round steps. After 4 rounds have been played, count up final scores, which are represented by these yellow flags. There is no in-game scoring, all scores are totaled at the end. Before looking at each phase in detail, we're going to have a look at all of the different resources and how you gain, pay and manage them, because it's this management which is a key part of how you do well in the game. The first and simplest resource is silver. There is a general supply of silver. When you gain it, simply take it and add it to your personal supply, and when you spend it, simply return it to the general supply. Second is your hand of device cards, and any effect like this allows you to draw device cards from the deck into your hand. You may hold at most 8 cards and must discard down immediately if you ever draw above. Cards may be used in 3 different ways. This icon indicates that a card simply needs to be discarded as part of the cost of an action. Here I would discard any 2 cards from my hand, discarding them face up. Second, a card may be discarded from your hand on your turn to resolve its immediate effect, which is this section highlighted in the bottom right of the image. The third way to use a card is to use it in an invention, which is where all of its remaining icons come into play, but more on that later. Third is influence. Each player begins with a limited pool of personal coloured influence, and any icon which shows that star represents placing one of these influence onto the appropriate component. This could be to place an influence on the matching coloured guild, or to mark a research space, or to mark a device. Should you ever need to place an influence but your supply is empty, you can always take one of your influence from a guild, but not from either other location. Some actions require you to spend influence from a guild, and that's indicated by the guild icon split in half. This, for example, would cost 2 charcoal influence. This would cost 1 of each influence. To pay influence, remove it from the guild and return it to your personal supply. Your fourth resource is dice, and as we've seen, you'll be placing dice on camels or workshops to take the majority of your main actions. Dice are managed on the left-hand side of your player board, and there are 7 different segments of that board where they can be. These are called exhausted, ready, determined, and inspired, and in the study, which is also broken into 3 tiers. Only those dice in these 3 boxes, ready, determined, or inspired, are considered available. They're the only ones which may be placed or spent on your turn. Furthermore, the higher the die is on this track, the more valuable it is when placed. A die that's in the ready space may be placed only on its current number. A die which has come from the determined box may be increased by 1 when it is placed. A die which comes from the inspired box can be increased by up to 5, which effectively lets you turn any die into a 6. You do physically adjust the die when making this placement, so you can't use this to increase a number beyond 6. The process of improving the position of a die is called brightening, and it's represented by this icon. Whenever you gain this icon, you may brighten one die by one step. This lets you do one of many different things. You can change a die from ready to determined, or from determined to inspired. If you brighten a coloured die from determined to inspired, you gain one influence in the guild matching that die. You can brighten a die within your study. Take the die and move it up to the matching coloured space the next level up, as long as it's empty, and then gain whatever benefit you covered. Your other options are that you can move a die from exhausted up to ready, or to the left from any study space into its corresponding area. Now, you will notice that for both of those examples, I roll the die, and this is a general rule. Anytime a die enters the available zone, it must be immediately rolled. Once you've done that roll, it remains on that value within this area until it's either manipulated or placed. It also means that when there's a die in one of the 4 unavailable sectors, it does not matter what face is showing. You can almost think of them as being blank cubes until they enter the available area. Coloured dice are more valuable than white ones, and you'll often come across an icon like this which lets you gain a coloured die into your study represented by the book. Take your chosen die and then place it onto its matching coloured space in the bottom section of the study. When you do this, you must resolve the effect you cover, which is to discard one white die. You'll almost always choose to do this from the exhausted section, but must choose from elsewhere or even choose a coloured die if there aren't any there available. In this way, gaining a die to your study doesn't increase your count of dice, it simply changes one into a colour of your choice. If you gain a die to your study but the matching slot is full, then move it to your exhausted section instead, but you must still discard another die. The only times you will actually increase your count of dice will be if you get an effect like this, where you gain a dice to a location other than your study. Here, for example, it's gaining a white die to your ready section. Because it's going straight into an available zone, you must roll it. For the most part, dice are going to be circulating around your board across the game, with anything you place on action spaces coming back exhausted at the end of a round. The last type of resource is your Craftspeople, and there are 6 Craftspeople tokens in your tower. When you need to spend a certain craftsperson, their icons will be shown in the cost of the action you're taking. This would require you to spend a blacksmith, a weaver, and a chandler. When the cost shows a 6-coloured disc with no other icons on it, that means any craftsperson may be spent. To spend a craftsperson, it must be active, meaning it's face up. You can see its icon on the token. These 2 craftspeople are inactive, they're face down. Then pay the craftsperson the amount of silver showing in the brown bar on its current tower tile. So for this chandler, it will be 1 silver. Flip it to inactive and advance it to the next step of the tower. If at any point the bottom level of your tower is empty, then you'll advance your tower. Resolve this effect in the black box, the 0 craftsperson box. Then if it shows this white flip arrow, flip the tile over and move it to the top of your tower, sliding all other pieces down. Later in the game, if that tile shows an X, you'll discard it entirely and slide the rest down. Craftspeople get more expensive the further you go up the tower, but they're also worth more points at the end of the game, so it's a double-edged sword. There are some other key icons you'll come across when managing your craftspeople. This green flip arrow means to flip a craftsperson back from inactive to active. So with this effect, you would reactivate your chandler, and with this effect, you could reactivate a craftsperson of your choice. This icon, the craftsperson with the up arrow, simply allows you to advance one craftsperson, whether active or inactive, up to the next level without paying or activating. And so those are all the resources you'll be managing through the game. There are a couple of free actions which will allow you to interchange between these resources. From here, you may discard 2 cards from your hand, either to brighten a die or to reactivate a craftsperson. And when taking an action requiring you to spend silver, you may deactivate a craftsperson, that is, flip them over without paying but without advancing, to reduce the silver cost by 1, and you may do this any number of times that you can afford. So now let's take a look at how to take actions. First, we'll look at camel actions. Each of these spaces in your camel area allows you to take 1 camel action. You begin the game with 2 spaces, and with effects we'll learn about later, this could increase to as many as 4. To take a camel action, place 1 or 2 dice into an empty camel space. Even if a space has 1 die in it, it's considered full. You couldn't use this one for another camel action this round. You can take any one of the 4 camel actions with dice of any colour, although coloured dice will give you a bonus for certain actions. In most cases, the sum of pips on the dice you place is going to have to meet a minimum threshold for the action you're taking. There are 4 camel actions, all of which relate to the creation of the devices in the game, and these are invent, build, test, and publish. There's a lot of different information on the device boards as you create them, but these icons will tell you exactly which parts to interact with as you take each action. The first action is invent, and this is the first step of creation. Very specifically, you'll be inventing on a device board in the left-hand column which does not yet have a device card on it. Firstly, to invent on this board, you must have placed dice which meet at least the pip threshold shown in this top right bar of the board. Then, using device cards from your hand, pay the discard cost, also shown in the top right bar of the board. Then take any other device card from your hand and play it into this right-hand slot of the device board. You'll evaluate these 3 influence markers. For any colour match you made between the card you placed and what's printed on the board, gain 1 influence in that guild. Here it's 2 orange influence. Then place one of your invention tiles over this bottom left bar of the board. Those are these 6 markers in your colour on the bottom right of your player board. Choose any one of them, it doesn't matter which, and then place it down here, gaining the bonus you cover, which is always to advance 1 step on the royalties track. If you cross one of these blue immediate reward steps, gain it now. Also, if you cleared off the second tile in a given column, gain the immediate reward that you've just revealed. And every 2 adjacent tiles horizontally you remove will score you 3 endgame points. Your newly invented device remains in the left column of the board alongside the empty device tiles which are yet to be invented. You can think of this as the device's blueprint. It is yet to be built, you just have the design on paper. Finally, invention is favoured by orange dice, and for each orange die you placed for the action, you may draw 1 device card into your hand. This can be before, during, or after the extra actions and can be used as part of the cost or even as the device you invent. The second camel action is build, and here you'll choose an invented device from the left column and bring it to life. The dice you place to take the action must at least meet the pip threshold now showing in the top right corner of the device. Now pay the craftspeople also showing in the top right. Next, the immediate reward showing in the bottom left corner of the tile is gained, first by the player who is taking the build action, and then by the player who invented this device, in other words, who owns this tile. If the same player is both inventor and builder, then the reward is gained only once. Then this tile is flipped over and moved to the top right. There's no immediate effect, but this serves as the cost for a future action. Next, mark the build slot of this device with your influence. Move the newly built device from the first column to the second column, and replenish the first column to 4 device tiles. Note there can't be more than 4 tiles in the second column, and if it's already full, then you cannot take this action. Building is favoured by charcoal dice, and so for each charcoal die you place as part of this action, you get the bonus of refreshing 1 craftsperson. Again, before, during, or after the action. Although it's shown 4th on your board, the third action I'm going to talk about is publishing. You can publish a device once it's been built, meaning that any device in the second column is available. You must have placed dice which at least meet the pip threshold shown in the top right bar of the card. For publishing, this is always 8. Pay 1 silver to the inventor of the device, that is, whoever owns this tile. Here, red would pay blue 1 silver. For the neutral tiles placed in setup, pay to the supply, and for your own inventions, pay nothing. Also spend the craftspeople, which is always a scribe and 1 of any craftsperson. Gain the immediate bonus printed in the bottom left of the tile. Once again, this is always a royalty. Mark the publishing slot of the tile with your influence. This could have the same or different player's influence. Finally, move the published device over to the published section of the board. Any number of published devices may be kept here. Publishing favours blue dice, and for each blue die placed you may brighten 1 die. The whole purpose of doing these is to gain victory points, and as shown on these bars here, there will be points for both the builders and publishers of all of these devices. And do take note of this brown bar at the bottom of each of the device cards. This represents an end of game scoring objective, which you'll be trying to meet in order to get the best points. The last of the Camel actions is testing. A device may be tested at any point after it has been built, meaning anything in the second column or in the published area. Devices can even be published without having undergone proper testing. To take the testing action, you won't be placing dice from your supply. Instead, you gain 1 white die and place it onto the camel space. Then take 1 of your available coloured dice and place it into an empty matching test slot of the device you're testing. In this way, you've given up an available coloured die, but gained back a white die which will come back exhausted. Each subsequent test die placed on the same device board must be equal or higher to all those that preceded it. As such, this die could not be placed, but this one could. If you covered an influence icon, you now gain that influence. And then, either way, you move your ship exactly the number of spaces along the river as shown on the slot you chose. Along the river path, there'll be 4 types of space. Research tile draw decks, spaces with research tiles already in them, empty spaces, and spaces with workshops. When moving, you'll count only spaces with workshops or with the draw decks. What I just showed you was moving 3 spaces. If you land on another player, stack your ship on top, the player on the bottom of the stack is considered ahead. When you land on a space with 1 or more workshop tiles, take the top one, add it to the leftmost open space in one of your workshop rows, and gain the benefit covered, if any. If you add the tile to anything other than the overall leftmost empty space, then you must pay 1 silver for each column ahead of the leftmost empty space you placed. If your movement takes you into or past a draw deck space, then you must stop there even if you have extra movement, and you resolve this effect printed at the top of the tile. The first time a player reaches one of these slots, flip all of the workshop tiles in the next segment of the track face up. If you gain any ship movement once you've reached the end of the track, you simply don't move and claim the bonus on the final space again. The second way to take an action is to place 1 or 2 dice into an empty workshop and resolve all of the workshop tiles within it which are triggered by those dice. Much like the camels, each of these is considered full as soon as it has either 1 or 2 dice in it. All of the tiles within a workshop have a minimum requirement to take the effect, and for all for which you qualify, you may take them in any order. A white symbol requires the pips to add up to at least that amount. A coloured symbol requires the pips to add up to at least that amount, and there to be at least one of that coloured die. So for this placement, these 3 workshops could be triggered, even this +4 orange. The orange itself may be only 3, but there are at least 4 pips and at least 1 orange. A workshop with good combinations can be very powerful, and it's sometimes possible to activate a workshop multiple times in the same round. This occurs when you trigger this effect, workshop to exhausted. And it means you take all the dice from a single workshop and move them to your exhausted area, freeing it up for another placement. Next, we'll talk about research. That's represented by this icon, and one of the main ways to take this action is with the worker placement spaces of the guilds. Here, for example, it would cost me 2 blue influence, and I could either resolve these icons or 1 step of research. You may either research a new tile from a draw deck or a previously placed tile. To research a new tile, you must go to the leftmost empty space along the river. Take the top 3 tiles from the draw deck to the left of that empty space, look through them and choose the one you wish to research. Return the other 2 to the bottom of the deck in any order. Then place your influence on the higher scoring slot of that space. For pre-existing technology, simply place your influence on the lower scoring space. Each research can be done only twice, and it must be by different players. You may freely research a space equal to or behind your ship, but if you research a space ahead of your ship, you must pay 1 silver for each space on the track which it is ahead. This counts all individual spaces, not just the number of spaces of movement it would take to get there. You're reminded of this extra cost by this icon in the bottom right corner of the board. There are 3 types of research tile. The first ones you find will give you some sort of ongoing benefit. The second ones will give you a benefit which is specific to placing your tent. And the third ones will be a once-off immediate bonus. That covers all of the major actions, and now we'll go through some of the minor actions and other effects that you'll find on icons in the game. This icon is a combination between the royalty icon and the start of round icon. And it means to immediately gain the start of round income effect of the current position of your royalty marker. This worker placement space lets you move your ship 1 space and gain a silver. By itself, the square with 3 colours represents a workshop tile, but this icon allows you to take any one workshop tile which is in your current position or to the left on the river track. This effect, the white die with a +1, allows you to manipulate one of your available dice. Take a die of any colour and increase its value by 1. Slightly distinct from this is an effect like this. Here, if you activated this workshop, it would allow you to treat the sum of dice in this workshop as 6 higher than it already is, even without manipulating the dice. In a similar way, this technology effect gives you a +2 on Camel actions, meaning when you place dice, you can treat the sum as if it were 2 higher in your Camel section. This effect lets you swap a die, and you're not just limited to your available dice. Here, for example, I could swap this white 4 with a blue 4, which would give me enough to trigger this effect in the same action. This also counts as gaining a blue die, so if I had an effect which triggered off gaining a blue die, I would get that as well. This action allows you to reactivate all of your craftspeople at once, and this action lets you activate the camel which has the matching icon, thereby giving you 1 extra camel action for this round only. When dice are cleared at the end of the round, this will be flipped back over to its inactive side. The last type of action is a tent action. Take your leftmost tent, place it into an empty one of these 5 tent spaces, and then resolve the following effects in any order. These are the effects printed on the tile next to your tent, all tent activation technologies that you've researched, a bonus of reactivating one craftsperson and brightening one die for each worker or camel space you haven't used this round, and the effect you uncovered with your tent. These are going to move the game along. This icon clears off this space, giving you an extra camel for the rest of the game. And later on, it will give people access to their third workers. Exactly when these happens depends on your player count. Once you've placed your tent, you may no longer take camel actions or worker placement actions this round. Every time it's your turn, you have one of these 4 options available to you. These are: you can activate a workshop, using available dice exactly as you did before. You can brighten a die, you can reactivate a craftsperson, or you can spend a craftsperson to clear the dice off a workshop. After the last player has finished the turn on which they've tented, the round is over and you'll proceed to end of round. Whoever tent is leftmost on this round's track becomes first player for the next round. From top to bottom, players brighten all of their dice, finishing with the study dice, which they may either brighten up or left. Then all dice on camels or workshops become exhausted, unless you've activated an end of round effect which modifies this. If you flipped your hired camel, then flip it back over, and retrieve your workers from the main board. Players now move their tents up to the leftmost open space of that section of the board. If you cover an influence, then gain that influence. Tents in these sections at the end of the game will be worth 2 influence on their matching guilds for the purposes of endgame scoring only. If you tented in the 4th section, then you gain the envoy. This black worker joins you for the next round, giving you 1 extra worker placement action. You'll return it before this phase is resolved next round. If you tented in the final section, then you get to flip your hired camel over from the start of the next round, meaning you get that extra camel space without having to spend a worker to get it. You'll now proceed to the next round and the start of round phase. Here you'll gain your incomes and royalties from 2 main places, both coloured green. You'll look at the royalties track and gain the income printed underneath it, and you'll gain this benefit printed on the left of your current lowest tower level, and this will increase as you go up your tower. In the 3 or 4 player game only, the 3rd and 4th players in turn order, which is clockwise from whoever has this token, will also draw 1 card. At the end of the final round, you'll skip all steps of the end of round phase except for raising tents up to the top level. For the left 3 slots, this will give you this influence bonus on the guilds. For the last 2 slots, there's no benefit for these tents. Now count up your final scores. For each of the 3 guilds, determine who has the most influence, gaining the higher number of points for the winner and second highest for second place. Ties are broken by whoever is leading on the ship track. So in this case, blue has 5 influence, including these tents, red has 3 and yellow has 1, meaning blue would get 4 points and red would get 1, but if red had another tent here, they would both now have 5 influence and red would win the tiebreaker. You'll score points based on the position of your royalties marker. Score the points next to each influence you've placed on a research space. For each craftsperson who's reached at least level 5, whether active or inactive, score the points on the current level. Score the points printed on any workshop tiles you've built. For any of your invention tiles which are gone, score any of these 3-point banners which are completely uncovered. In this case, it's 6 points. For each unpublished device that you built, that is, you have your influence on it, gain 1 point for each testing die on the device. Here, red gains 2 points, yellow would gain nothing. For each published device, both the builder and the publisher get points according to here. If the device had a different builder and publisher, then the builder gets 3 points and the publisher gets 1 point per test die. If the builder and publisher are the same player, then that player gets 1 point plus 1 for each test die. So here, red would get 2. then all influence markers on either a built or published device will score according to the endgame scoring objective at the bottom of the device card. If you at least meet the green requirement, then you gain 2 points, and if you at least meet the blue requirement, you gain 4 points. Here, for example, if red had 4 charcoal influence, red would gain 2 points for this influence. While here, if red had 4 sets of non-matching influence, then red would gain 4 points for the build influence and 4 points for the publish influence, a total of 8. Finally, cash in any leftover silver and device cards at a rate of 4-1. The player with the highest score wins, and if tied, furthest down the river breaks the tie. When playing with 2 players, you'll use a simple dummy player to create some more competition on the board. You'll also start the game with only 1 pre-built device. At the start of each round, flip 1 dummy card. This will show you where to place influence for the dummy player and how many spaces to move its ship along the river. This does not collect or reveal workshop tiles. Then the bottom of the card will show 3 worker placement spaces. On the left, take the token which matches the influence shown and place it next to that space. This increases the influence cost to take that action for this round. For the other 2, block out the specific space which has that cost. This will force players to take the more expensive options. The first player to tent in each round then also immediately gets to place the dummy player's tent into one of the other spaces, blocking it out for their opponent. At the end of the round, only the players' tents are raised. The dummy player's one is returned to the supply, meaning that these end-of-game guild bonuses cannot be gained. You will count the dummy player's influence when determining first and second for guild majorities. Finally, as a simpler or quicker variant, and this is very much recommended for your first game, you may choose to play the 3-round variant. Flip over your setup card and take your first tent, placing it on the top space. This immediately grants you an extra card and silver in setup, and the bonus uncovered by your tent. So here you would get your 3rd camel immediately. This card has 3 objectives on it which you must meet one after the other in order to gain these extra bonuses. The first bonus comes when you've invented twice, built twice, published twice, or gained one of these research tiles. Upon achieving this, move your tent down and gain the reward. The second benefit comes upon achieving each of these actions once, or gaining one of these research tiles. And the reward is to clear an invention tile off your board, gain its immediate reward, and discard it. Finally, upon doing one of these actions 3 times, or gaining an immediate research tile, gain the last reward. Otherwise, play 3 rounds and then resolve final scoring as normal. And that's how to play Inventors of the South Tigris. Do check out the project page for the game. We'll put a link to that in the description below.
And thanks so much for watching. Your like and comments are much appreciated. Subscribe to see what's coming and have a great day. See you next time.